February of 2018, I was in my first year of seminary at Yale Divinity School. Things were going okay. I had made very good friends. I was learning a lot. I had just gone through a breakup, which sent me into a season that I now refer to as my own bleak midwinter. It's funny. And it was Ash Wednesday, so it was just a cheery time all around. My classmates and I had just arrived at the Monastery of the Holy Cross for our junior year class retreat. We were all tired. Seminary is expansive and also relentless, and I think we were quite ready for a break and for a chance to draw close to one another and to God. Unfortunately, when we arrived, it was to discover that nothing was how we wanted it to be. First, as we walked into the reception area of the monastery, a monk ran out to us and said, "Shh." We said, "Oh." And he informed us that the monks, because it was Ash Wednesday, were holding the Great Silence all day long. Normally, the Great Silence at Holy Cross is held in the nighttime, beginning around 9 p.m. and breaking after breakfast. But that day, we had arrived into a period of solemn silence during which we were not allowed to speak to anyone unless we were in great need. We were, as it was whispered to us, to join in the holy silence. Delightful. We were then told that there would indeed be lunch, which had not occurred to us that there would not be lunch, though many of my friends were fasting. As an aside, I was not fasting. I was too sad. And that meant that I had made my friends stop for fast food breakfast on the way to Holy Cross, which now, many years later, I understand to be an act of great love because I absolutely made the inside of the car smell like hash browns on a day that they were all fasting. We entered eagerly into the refectory of the monastery to find a whiteboard with the menu for the meal of the day, and it said, miso soup, seaweed. I love miso soup, but I do think of it as a savory beverage, not as a meal. We ate. We remained very hungry. We did not speak, but instead looked woefully at one another across the refectory. I suffered silently in pants that were too tight in the chapel as we read psalms that included words like, "I am as useless as a broken pot," and "I am a worm and no man," and I was convinced that that was true. I wonder sometimes if the disciples ever had similar experiences as they traveled out in the world trying to do what Jesus asked them to do. Jesus sends them out burdened by restrictions and instructions for where they are to go, with whom they are to speak, and how they are and are not to conduct themselves. There's a whole section of the gospel just after our reading that really gets into all of those parameters. There's certainly an implication that all will be provided to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the provisions will be what is expected or what they longed for. I think that's kind of the trick of the Christian life, at least in my experience so far. When Christ beckons us to go, we go, and we are often provided for, but it is not always, or even often, in ways that we expect or want. Sometimes the provision is surprising, and sometimes it doesn't feel like enough. Sometimes it's just miso soup. What our reading doesn't include is what Jesus promises his friends after he tells them to go. He says that even when the journey of discipleship leads to uneasy places, even when it is not immediately clear that they will have everything that they need, they will still be able to endure to the end because the Spirit will be with them and acting through them. And I think that's maybe the holiest provision of all, the promise that we will not be alone. I do not remember my junior year retreat positively. It was not an enjoyable time. But I did find myself accompanied all through it by friends who barely held their laughter inside as we completed a puzzle in the silence together, by a classmate who brought me a bar of chocolate and handed it through a crack in the door to my room when the seaweed ran out that day, by a best friend who said, "Come with me," and snuck me into his car and took me to a Target in upstate New York when we were supposed to be praying so that I could buy yoga pants that didn't squeeze so tight. There was provision, just enough.